Hello, everyone. This is Face-to-Face International. It's an experiment that the Reeves Center is launching this year, and the idea is to bring smart people together who may or may not know each other, who are great contributors to work at William & Mary, may have something in common that we discover through the conversation, and ultimately, we will always end up talking about what it's like to work in a university. I think that's one of the key factors, but the conversation, I have prepared questions for you, but the conversation will also go where it goes. You should feel free to talk to each other if it makes sense, and if it doesn't, I have plenty of questions for you. All right. I'm going to start with you, Amanda. Amanda is the Assistant Dean for MBA Admissions at the Mason School of Business. We're here also with Fabricio Prado, who is Associate Professor of History. Amanda, so you're up first. A few weeks ago, I wrote you an email saying, explaining what face-to-face is and asking if you'd be interested in being one of the participants. You got back to me right away, which I appreciate very much. And you also said, well, good timing. I'm in an airport on my way, I think you said, to London. Is that right? So can you tell us about traveling to London? Why were you going? How long had it been since you'd been in London? And what was that like?
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, I was on my way to the UK for recruiting, and I was in tears at that moment in time because I was so overjoyed to be back out in the global market and to be traveling for an in-person recruiting event. We are so very fortunate at the Mason School of Business that we have the opportunity to travel all across the United States and all around the world in search of our talented global MBA students, and it has been a very trying 2 years to operate in a virtual modality. So we participated in the MBA Tour event in London. We saw over 40 business professionals on a Saturday afternoon in the city. We were also able to reconnect with William & Mary alumni in London and to have some small group dinners. So a really successful recruiting event. And again, so very happy to have our brand back out in market and to be able to meet our aspiring candidates in person, to learn their stories and to share with them about the William & Mary experience. So thank you for the question.
So I don't think I fully understand about the business professionals. Are they the applicants, or are they the people who connect us with the applicants?
Yes, these are the actual candidates. So we work with a couple of different companies and vendors that have access to, for example, GMAT and GRE test takers around the world. And so then they link us to a candidate pool. But the 40 people that we met are the aspiring MBA candidates themselves. They sign up for a Saturday session where they'll meet schools from all around the world, and they'll be able to participate in smaller sessions. For example, we conducted a resume workshop that day in London. The really unique part about that experience is that the two featured American universities were, of course, us, William & Mary, but also Harvard. So it was really special for both of us to be in London that day, especially with our history here. But yes, the candidates directly.
Nice. So Amanda, you're not new at this. You've been doing international recruitment and admission for a while in many places beyond London, lots of countries in the world. I am thinking about, like, you must have some stories to tell, right? About maybe people you've met, a student who you remember, some memory that stands out.
There are so many memories, and in fact, that has been one of the main reasons that I've remained in this position at William & Mary for so long. I can't imagine another role on campus that would lend me the ability to make such deep and lasting relationships. Fabricio and I were talking when we first met, and it took literally 30 seconds for us to make the connection that he is Brazilian and one of my favorite recruiting destinations happens is South America and Brazil. So I mentioned right off the bat today that there are two students that I would love to introduce Fabricio to. Juliana Olmcunha is our Associate Director for Graduate Career Management, and her husband, Gustavo Lambert, is now working at Capital One, but they are graduates of our MBA program that I met while recruiting in Brazil. Juliana was just getting started with marketing for the Rio Olympics, and when I met her, she said, Amanda, I'm a few years away from my MBA, but I hope we can develop a relationship. And in fact, we did just that. She was able to work another 2 years towards the Olympic Games, fulfill her obligation, and then that next August she enrolled here at William & Mary. But in the meantime, she met her husband Gustavo, and she brought him with her to study the MBA. So I was able to benefit from really maintaining a relationship, and now Juliana is serving the graduate community here as a professional on staff. So delighted for our connection. I'm sure we'll be able to take this forward as I continue to recruit in South America with some help, and a really meaningful relationship for me in terms of two students that I consider successful graduates of the program.
So thank you, Amanda. And Fabricio, before you were a professor, you were a student. You were a student in Brazil, where you're from, and then you were a student in Argentina, am I right? And
Yes.
then Emory University. So that's an interesting trajectory. Can you walk us through how that came about?
Well, yes, and thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and like meeting new people and establishing new connections. And perhaps connections is something that is at the core of my answer as well. And in Brazil, I'm from the southernmost part of Brazil. So I'm kind of 4 hours away from the border with Uruguay and Argentina. And let's say that we are kind of 18 hours away from São Paulo, right? So we're much closer to Argentina. So that was something that seeing people thinking in a different language, spending time, meeting during the summer friends that would come from Argentina and Uruguay, I was always curious about what is on the other side of the border. So when I started studying history in Brazil, a big thing for me was not just thinking about Brazil and the Portuguese Empire. I wanted to see what was on the other side of the border. And that's how I did my master's, was half of it in Argentina. And that was my first time of having a real immersion in another language. And that's the moment that you see that thinking in another language opens a whole new world. It makes you reconsider, the basic objects that we know in our daily life. You start seeing how people describe them differently, and kind of I fell in love with that feeling. But also I think that learning about a different culture really helped me to understand myself, understand the world, seeing new possibilities in terms of from business to politics to culture to music, right? So let's say that I got the bug of traveling in that moment. And once I went back to Brazil, I started teaching, and I realized very soon that I was really interested in exposing my students to other cultures. But at that moment in time in Brazil, it was a bit difficult to write history of a different country. If I were to stay in Brazil for my PhD, I would definitely, it would be much more easy for me to write the history of Brazil. And that was the moment that while I was studying in Argentina, I was introduced to a professor, an American professor that spent her life working on the cross-border interactions in South America. And she happened to teach at Emory University in the United States. So suddenly I was a Brazilian studying the history of Uruguay and Argentina here in the United States. And eventually, here I am, teaching my students here at William & Mary about the history of different countries in Latin America and in the Atlantic world. And I think that these interconnections, the personal connections, the networks that one builds, really they take you. At a certain point, you think that you are going there, but then they take you and you start navigating a much very vast ocean.
I see in your materials a lot the reference to "and the Atlantic world." What is that all about?
Well, that's perhaps what defines me as a historian. It's easy for us to think about business in terms of nations, right? And histories as well. We think history of Brazil, history of Mexico, or history of the United States. But that's obfuscate a little bit that no nation exists in a vacuum. We are connected. Our borders are porous. Our linkages take us to China, take us to Japan. So the Atlantic world actually is this space, all right, that goes beyond a specific country. So thinking about the history of Brazil or the history of the United States itself, we cannot separate our history from Europe, much less from Africa, or even like in terms of the United States, China trade and our connections to India in the beginning of the early republic here were so important. So the Atlantic world tries to represent exactly that, this breaking away from these national boxes that we are accustomed to live in and emphasizing the connections, the transnational and trans-imperial connections that forged our nations, that forged our cultures and economies. So in a way, I feel that the Atlantic world liberated me a little bit from nationalism and allow us to see the interconnections that are difficult to capture sometimes, but are so central to who we are at the end.
Yeah, I feel like, Amanda, you have a response to some of what Fabricio is saying, right? Because especially maybe about the boxes that we are so comfortable with that are around boundaries and countries. And you were nodding kind of when Fabricio was talking about that. So I'm thinking it would be good to let you weigh in.
Absolutely. That really is the most important aspect of MBA study in a global environment, in a global community. And I see that happen with our MBA students every day. We're about 40% global in the MBA cohort and representing approximately 20 different countries in every incoming class. So the benefit of our students immersing together and learning from each other, and every single day in a classroom dynamic, the conversations are shared from varying perspectives. And that's a really spectacular part of what I think we've been able to do with the business school community, is maintaining the global footprint and ensuring that we are not a regional MBA program here at William & Mary, but that we are a global presence, and that those discussions are very healthy and very alive. Students from Brazil and China and India and Nigeria and Ghana and all over the world. So a really incredible learning community. So yes, a lot of positive affirmation for what you are saying and what you have experienced in your life.
So the students, is the U.S. the first border they've crossed, or have they done something more like Fabricio did, where leaving Brazil to study in Argentina and then coming to the U.S.?
I would say that the majority of our global students are students that have studied in their home country, and then this is their first global opportunity. Out of the 40 or so students, perhaps maybe 10 to 15 have had other study opportunities, typically within their region where they live. But some of our students are also Fulbright scholars, or are students that have had maybe a year of high school abroad or a year of university abroad, but now they're working professionals who are traveling to the U.S. for the first time, really, for a full graduate experience, a full program. So yes, some of them have had limited travel. Some of them have said, I have never been outside of Nigeria, and this is the first time that I am even traveling out of my home country. And that's a really incredible experience to welcome them and to work so closely with our partners here at the Reeves Center, who make that immersion into the U.S. and into our William & Mary community so easy, such an easy and successful transition.
What are some of the jobs that the students have when they leave, and where are they?
Absolutely. So thankfully, I am able to address a much healthier employment outcome for our global students now. We've had some challenges. 75% of American universities experienced a decline in global applications from about 2018 until right up against the pandemic. And then obviously the pandemic for the past 2 years has been very difficult. But just this season, we're now seeing sort of the reopening or the welcoming of U.S. companies to our global talent again, a resurgence of opportunity for our students. So we're seeing internship outcomes and placements at companies like Amazon. Amazon is fiercely competitive for global talent around the country. Microsoft and Google are competing for top business school talent. Companies like Capital One and JP Morgan are all interested in our MBA talent again, and I am so very happy to see that with a change in administration, with a true demand for employment and talent in the country right now. And we're seeing an ascension of CEOs who are from global backgrounds. That is all very, very helpful. We're also looking at new policies for employment visas. William and Mary made the decision to take a few of our MBA specializations and to go after a STEM designation. That is also opening a door of opportunity that if a global MBA works for a STEM company, they have the potential to get an extension on a traditionally 1-year OPT. So they'll be able to potentially add an additional 2 years of employment with a company like IBM or Microsoft or Amazon in the STEM space. So we're feeling better about the prospects and the outcomes. So for a while, we really had to really address the value proposition of studying in the States and what they would gain. But now we're able to really show that fuller ROI on their investment is here. And I think we all agree we need top global talent in the country to keep us moving forward, to be competitive in a global landscape, and we're really excited about prospects moving forward.
Fabricio, let's switch gears a little bit. You took students to Brazil to study with you, and you gave classes out in the city.
Indeed.
We'd like to know more about that.
Well, I think that I am on the other side here, complementing what Amanda's doing, right? One of my big pleasures here, actually, I was walking here and thinking, what else can I think of programs to do, right? Because taking students to a different country, many of them who have never sometimes left this region here, right? Or never left the United States. It's like it's beautiful to see they're opening their eyes, opening their minds, and they kind of blossoming getting out of everything out of those interactions that you can see that they are really changing the way that they see the world, and that is so rewarding. And so taking students to Brazil, it was a challenge in some ways, but it was extremely rewarding because Brazil is a huge country, right? It's like 200 million plus inhabitants. We have a very large and diverse population. So when we are in Rio de Janeiro, it's a global city with 12 million people. The students felt a little bit overwhelmed in the beginning, but then they started getting acquainted to the neighborhood, the feeling of walking around. And the streets of Rio, the sidewalks are crowded. So the students had to learn, wow, this is like, there's a lot of traffic here. Like, we have to figure out where you are going, the space that you are occupying the sidewalk. And especially like Brazil, I think the Olympics, brought in closer to the image of Brazil, became more familiar to many Americans. But there's a lot of fear surrounding it. Talk Rio. The reputation of the city sometimes is not as nice as one would wish, but suddenly you see that these students realize that, wow, that we should not be afraid here. Everybody, children are playing on the streets, children are playing on the little in the playgrounds. So they started exploring the city on their own. And every day I made a point of trying not to teach inside of a classroom there. So every day, if we were talking about the founding of the city, we went there to the Sugar Loaf. That's where the city started. And we walked around, we walked on the historical sites. We could overlook, as I was explaining what was happening 400 years ago, we were able to see, I was able to point at the areas where action happened. And they started also, and that went beyond. As we get closer to present, they were able to talk to people that were actually part of that story. They were able to talk to folks that were entrepreneurs in the favelas, in the shantytown. And instead of thinking of talking about the favelas as something that is out there, suddenly it's not out there, the favela is here, it's the community, it's not the favela anymore, right? We are seeing the perspective from here, and they are talking to entrepreneurs, to musicians, that are living there. So the perspective has changed substantially. And I found interesting that once we came back, one of the students, none of the students changed major, but they changed their emphasis, right? So some of them now are in law school, and they are totally immersed and interested into this, sometimes advocacy, but international connections, right? Students that were thinking about, that were majors in African studies, they were thinking just about the African-American experience in the United States as something isolated. And suddenly see, no, there is an African diaspora that goes beyond, and some challenges that you're seeing here, we have the same challenges with different solutions or different tones happening elsewhere, in this case in Brazil. But I felt that students at the end, they were showing me things and places that they discovered and that they liked in the city. So the last days, like pretty much they wanted to show me the places that they discovered, and that was beautiful to see.
That's wonderful. I like a lot how you started by talking about sort of this fear and then how it lifts. That's a huge accomplishment.
Yeah, I think that and that's what I like too about the environment of the university. Because we are in one place, but full of diversity, right? So that says that students in the beginning, one thing is to think about what is over there. The other thing is to experience it. And also not only the reputation, but the idea of a foreign language, an environment with that you don't master, the dynamics, that you don't master completely what is being said, but there is something beyond the language. There is like a human connection that goes through body language, sometimes a smile, and you could see that happening with the students. And I think that at some certain point it happened to me too, right? But it just proved for me that our students are eager to learn and once they have these opportunities, they embrace it. Like the fear becomes something of the past, and they are trying to navigate and acquire. They were really trying to get everything that they could at the end. I remember that they were like at the beginning, like we're gonna have too many weekend trips. But in the end, they were like, can we add some more trips during the week here, so to see different spaces, different environments, and meeting different people, right?
Let's talk more about universities then. Yeah, the work of the university, which you just described. I think you both have. So, Amanda, this is what I'm sort of thinking about. There's this idea of something called the global university, and you have traveled so much. You're familiar with a lot of universities around the world. Like, let's put William and Mary aside, so we're not sort of analyzing where we work, but thinking about the words global university. What is that when you hear that language?
Absolutely. When I think about global university, I also reflect on some of the partnerships that we've gained and some of the teaching experiments that we've tried to undertake. We also take the MBAs on global business immersion, and in those contexts, we rely on our global partners. So it might be a university that we partner with. So, for example, Professor Rates had conducted a study, I believe it was with Eli Lilly, but they partnered with Prasetya Mulia Business School in Jakarta, Indonesia, and also Deakin University in Australia. So in a virtual world, they all studied a complex problem of introducing a new drug to market in Indonesia, in the Southeast Asian market, and they all came up with a solution and then met in country in Indonesia. So it was William and Mary and Deakin visiting Prasetya Mulia, and they were all able to come together and then present their findings to Eli Lilly on how they would bring a controversial drug to market in Southeast Asia, specifically into Indonesia, which is predominantly Muslim. And it was the best example, well, there are many great examples, but of a learning lab that I had experienced in my tenure, of really seeing different perspectives, different teaching styles, and then working with a giant partner, a giant global company, to produce something that would result in an in-country immersion. And the students had an incredible time. Our alumni that are still very involved, that were a part of that sort of field consultancy project, still say that that was one of their best, not only global learning experiences, but learning experiences in general in the program.
So when you hear global university, then what comes to mind isn't a single place, but these partnerships, collaborations. And what do you think of when you hear the words global university? Is there an example of a place that you think is, the model of a global university or something like that, Fabricio?
Well, I don't connect to I don't think specific of a place, but I think of a global university. Perhaps a global university is a place where many cultures, many connections, many roads meet, and from where you can access many places. I think of a global university as a place that attracts a lot of talent, a lot of people with different experiences and backgrounds. So it's like we have this inflow of different references and experiences and talent, but at the same time as a launching pad where from here we can access different places, learn about different cultures, have different experiences. So for me, the global university is, this two-way space or hub that serves to connect as a hotspot of cultural experiences and diversity in general.
A launching pad.
A launching pad, exactly.
I would like to now ask you a question that has to do with your research. So you work on colonial Latin America, and that's an academic kind of expertise. And in addition, recently in popular discourse, the words colonization and decolonization have become part of the vocabulary. What do those words mean, and why should we pay attention to them?
Well, thank you. This is a big question and an excellent question. I think that when you think of, let's start with colonization, right? We need to, the problem was colonizing. Colonization is this process in which certain countries entered in contact and perhaps invaded, conquered others, established connections and relationships with a big asymmetry in terms of power. So, for instance, in Latin America, everything that is European, and these days everything that is American, we think that is imported, therefore these things are better. Whether if it is local, national, sometimes mixed race, of indigenous culture, it was frowned upon, seen as lesser, right? So, and that creates a big problems when you really push forward thinking that we want a society that's equal, that offers equal opportunities, that is inclusive, that treats all its members in a fair and just way, which is some ideas that I think that are very important and valuable these days. So how do you solve that problem? That's where decolonization comes. So decolonization is not about kicking out the immigrants, the folks that came from Europe, but it's about changing this asymmetry in power and learning from the indigenous peoples, the indigenous cultures. We live in a time in which the greatest challenge for our society, as a global village, right, is the environmental crisis, right? And all the violence and disputes that trigger maybe on these nationalistic boxes, as you are seeing. So what other societies that have been around for thousands of years living with the environment in a sustainable way? That's nothing that we don't need to imagine that. The indigenous people of the Amazon are doing that on a daily basis for thousands and thousands of years. What can we learn from them? They have a lot to teach, right? Indigenous people of Africa have the same thing, and once they traveled, they brought their culture and many other skills, right, in terms of managing environments, ways of producing things, thinking about rice production and so forth. And these are all very important and valuable knowledge. We should not discard them based on who produced that. So in a way, decolonizing is about shifting the balance of power between cultures and trying to include and incorporate all this diverse pools of knowledge and appreciating to the richness of all these countries. We do that a lot sometimes without not attributing authorship. When you think about rock and roll, there's no rock and roll without Africans, right? But sometimes we needed an Elvis Presley to make it popular. And we forgot that the African roots of rock and roll. Same thing in Brazil, we appropriated samba, and that's our national rhythm. But we selectively appropriate that, right? In a country in which almost 80% of the population are people of color, right? Brazil has a lot of problems with inequality. It's about the selective appropriation. So decolonizing is about being more open, incorporating, but not just as a token, but really, bringing it and making part and parcel, having an honest dialogue, bringing more people to the table, and of course, stimulating cooperations too. I think that's an important part in moving forward with decolonizing. Is about respect and cooperation.
Thank you. That was an amazing answer. Amanda, I'm thinking that some of that language applies to the work that you do. Something about, the changing asymmetries of power or bringing people to the table. Maybe some other parts of Fabricio's answer resonate.
A lot of it resonates. I'm from a very small town in Ohio, and I could have only imagined traveling abroad when I was younger. And to think of where I've been and what I've seen now is sometimes overwhelming for me. And to encounter prejudice and racism and power structures and religious systems, caste systems, the things that I've seen in other countries that, we're accused of a lot here in the United States, but then you see it replicated around the world, and it's hard to swallow. It's hard to think about the injustice around the world that you encounter, but one thing that I truly believe in is that education can be a great equalizer. And really, there are times that I don't think of myself at all as a dean of admission or a gatekeeper, but I think of myself as an ambassador to the United States in some regards, or as that one person that's going to enter a student's life and be a difference maker by really helping them to see what the value of education can do for changing their entire world or someone's world within their network. And so I truly do believe in the power of education and what it brings to our students. And I've seen the difference. We have also shared stories with alumni that do open up and reveal that difference that we made in their ability to support their family back in their home country, or their ability to, stabilize a dynamic. It's been incredible, some of the stories that students have shared, and thinking about what's happening in the world today with Russia and the Ukraine, and thinking about reaching out to Ivan Matveychenko, one of our alums who's in Kiev with his children right now, and trying to get into a back door to reach him via LinkedIn and Facebook. It's very difficult. We're worrying about him every single day as we watch the news. In that same breath, we're worried about how our Russian students who are here are feeling about what's happening in their country and what's going on. And it's a lot to think about how we do see this in our students every day. And we're fortunate to bear witness, and hopefully by doing so, I know I'm certainly raising a 6-year-old boy to understand that there's a world that's much bigger than the world that he lives in here in Williamsburg, Virginia. So thank you I studied post-colonialism and apartheid South Africa out of my Spanish major, so completely understand, and I can't wait to dive into your research, Fabricio.
Yeah, and I think that you just saying like this idea of like when you travel, you see much more, and you can reflect on what you see here. And being an ambassador, I think that that's so important too, because what we do here when we lead a study abroad program, we are opening the eyes and opening our students' minds to the world. So it's not just that they are seeing and empathizing with people abroad, right? But it goes beyond, and that's, I think, something so important. It goes beyond the nationalism. It's not like what Brazil is doing. No, Brazil is full of people. South Africa, you have people. And oftentimes, these people are not the same as the government. Mm-hmm. And I think that we see now when you're mentioning Russian students here, the people of Russia is not the government of Russia, right? And you see how, in terms of thinking about colonialism again, how imperialism and colonialism and fueled with nationalism can cause tragedies, as we are witnessing. But when we travel, when we see this idea of bringing folks, the global university that receives folks, that you can see different perspectives in our own world, but once you travel abroad, you see another world. You're going to that world, but people are seeing who we are. So, as you're saying, when people meet Brazilians, right? My students, a lot of Brazilians were looking at my American students and thinking, oh wow, these guys, this super wealthy kids. Not necessarily. They start saying that, wow, you guys have similar experiences than us. Other experiences are different, and they learn too. So there's this being ambassadors, not just to show what the U.S. has to offer for the world, but for them to understand too the people who are here that not necessarily represent what the administration, the federal government is in the foreign policy appears in their countries. So I think that this creates empathy, and that's the idea of shared human experience, and that's what we really need these days and in the future. And I think that that's also important too, like, in the world of business, for instance, I was thinking as you were speaking, how important is this human connection, right? The crossing bridges. I think that that's a central part of what our mission here at any university should be.
I have a ton of questions I could ask you both. I'm going to skip ahead to the final two, though. I'm just curious, as a way to get to know you better, if you had jobs other than the roles you have right now, like a different profession than the one you're in, what do you think it might be?
I think I would literally try to be an ambassador to a foreign country. I absolutely love working in a global context, and some of the organizations that we've partnered with over the years, like Fulbright and Amethyst. It is so rewarding to feel that you're a difference maker, and the human connection is absolutely everything. And so I would love an opportunity to represent our country in a global environment and to be a difference maker in that capacity. So I wasn't entirely kidding. I would love to have an opportunity down the road, or to retire and join the Peace Corps. That was my one life's regret, that I didn't have the opportunity to join the Peace Corps, and I understand there's a fabulous program for retirees in the Peace Corps.
Well, I think that if I were not... I can answer that. If I were not a historian, I would continue to be an educator. And I think that more and more I value the importance of education at the basic level, and also the importance of fostering transnational interactions. I think that if I were not in a Department of History, I would be in a school of education.
And you did study education, right, Amanda?
I did. Interestingly, my focus was higher education fundraising. So I ended up in an area that has a very similar skill set, but not the exact intent from my degree here at William & Mary.
All right. This is actually the second last question. I remember I had three that I really wanted to do. So what are you most proud of, each of you?
All right. I have to say that, I'm sorry, but what I'm most proud of these days is my little gaucho, my son. 14 months, I cannot say anything but that. But I think that but now moving to a more selfish perspective, what I'm most proud of myself is like to be able to speak different languages and to communicate appropriately and to write something that is meaningful to different people and put people together. I recently, and I give an example of what really made me proud. I'm still proud of it. I got my book about Argentina that was published in English, translated by a published house in Buenos Aires. So I was really, really proud that as a Brazilian writing in the United States, folks that I'm writing the history about that are so important to me, right? I make a very nice living, comfortable because of their history, that they felt that what I was saying was important, and they published the book there. So that is like what really makes me proud of myself. But little gaucho, tail in the first place these days.
And the exact same. I have a slightly older gaucho. He is 6 years old, and again, I feel like I'm changing his perspective. So very proud of that. But I'm a first-generation college student, and that's not something that I talk about a lot because my mother actually worked at the university that I attended, and she graduated the year after I did. So it's kind of a technicality, but I really feel that I've honored everything that my parents worked so hard to change in our family by pursuing education and really staying focused on not only earning degrees, but truly also making a difference in the world and passing this opportunity on to others. So I really enjoy when I get to work with other first-generation college students, whether it's exploring their undergrad pathway or graduate students who thought, that there won't be life after undergrad. So I feel like I do resonate with them, and it's just been a real joy to have the opportunities that I've gained through education. I'm very grateful to both of my parents, but also especially to my mother for showing me the path forward.
Such beautiful answers. I'm going to end the interview here. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.